want some color.
That I think it's a very nice, stylish choice. A lot of people don't choose it.
Yes.
And I think I might want to wear one sometime soon.
Yeah,
I just have to have a fashion sense, which I don't have.
Well, we can help you with that.
All right, I appreciate it. I last time I got fashion advice was back when I was in college, so I'm outdated by a few years now. So
there was this wonderful lady in New York. I think I mentioned her name earlier, Wilma Ellis Henderson, the one who I told you I was traveling in the South with. And she was a member of New York Assembly with me. Later on, she became a counselor and quite an accomplished lady. So one day she told me, Hussein, I love you like a brother. And I travel with you all over the place. But I hate the way you look.
Oh, wow, that's pretty strong.
Yeah, the way you dress is awful. And then she said, my husband has a good taste of clothes. And he goes and buy all these clothes, tailor-made and otherwise. And he wear it a few times, then leave it in closet. Would you like to come and try some of them? And if you like it, I give it to you.
Okay.
No problem. I went to their apartment. Believe me, I picked up 4 or 5 suits, pick up a bunch of pants, and shirt. I didn't like to wear somebody's shirt. So for a few years, I looked so good. And this man. So we had another occasion was cute. Again, somebody complained about how I look. So I went to this fancy store, Bloomingdale is a big shop. So in the Bloomingdale, they have a people called image consultant.
Really? Interesting.
If they don't know what to get, they come and help you. So I thought, okay, maybe I consult with one of these image consultants. How little I knew that this woman is going to cost me lots of money. So I told her, could you help me to pick up some jacket and pants? And of course, doctor. And they call it doctor to fool you. So she took me to different part of the store, a jacket, try this one, this match shirt. So that day, she cost me $6,000. It goes back 30, 40 years ago, and it was lots of money. So I stopped consulting with the image maker anymore. So I decide myself, I go to buy something, it lasts me a long time. Okay, that's enough of that. We have to move to Tahirih.
Yes, of course. Well, we just got a nice intro there. I think we can all admit that we commonly share the poor fashion sense, and I appreciate that sense of commonality.
You're right.
So, hello everyone. Welcome. We've been having people join in on the Zoom, so we're kind of delayed on that, but we appreciate your patience as we are having people join on the Zoom right now. Now, the subject today is a very, very special subject. As you may know, those of you who have heard of Tahirih, she was not just an amazing person, she was an amazing woman. And her champion women's rights, she's one of the people who started that in a country that was one of the worst places you'd ever expect such a movement to start. But it was most needed. We can all agree. It was most needed. Now, the subject today is Tahirih of Persia and her American contemporaries. Champions women's rights has become more important in recent years, and you might think that fight for female justice started in the 1960s, or perhaps after World War I when women's suffrage was pushed forward. In truth, there were 2 simultaneous struggles for women's rights, both of which started in the mid-19th century. This is the 1800s we're speaking. One of them is known by an early meeting in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848. And the other began in Persia, now commonly known as Iran, in the 1840s. In the 19th century, in the 1800s, countless individuals believed in a new revelation that it was imminent. They believed that something new was coming. And in Persia, the Bab, which in English means the gate, fulfilled, or it means the portal, if you will. It means multiple meanings if you go into an Arabic dictionary, but Baha'is use the term the gate. In Persia, the Bab fulfilled the prediction by several clerics of the appearance of the promised Qa'im, the promised one. Tahirih of Qazvin, a city in Iran, a gifted teacher, was at the vanguard of spreading the Bab's teachings. She unceasingly proclaimed the Babi faith, and she brought a deeper understanding of his teachings to the rapidly growing numbers of his converts. Her vibrant poetry gave voice to her spiritual longing and passion, and its freshness reflected the vitality of the new spiritual teachings. She emerged as the most outspoken of the Babi leaders. The authorities responded by having her murdered in the dead of night. She was stoned and thrown into a well and covered in stones. The memory of her life survives in her poems. At the same time, many Americans believed the second coming of Christ was imminent. Several churches and movements emerged, some founded by women. Of course, in relation to this movement. Among them was Ellen G. White, a theological thinker who shaped the beliefs of the Adventist movements, Sojourner Truth, who came up from slavery to electrify audiences with her salvation preaching, and Mary Baker Eddy, founder of the Church of Christian Science. These women leaders were prefigured in the 18th century by Mother Ann Lee, founder of the Shakers, and the long-forgotten female exhorters. In the hearts of Persian and American women, God's hand was at play, orchestrating a realization of the spiritual basis of life and the need to move towards oneness. Now, this is part 2. I want to remind everyone that there is a part 1 that you can find on the Baha'i Center of Clearwater Facebook page. You can also find it on the YouTube Clearwater Baha'is. This is sponsored and hosted by the Clearwater LSA. And further, for everyone to know, our speaker is Dr. Hussein Adiyeh. He was born and raised in Neyriz, Iran. He is a 6th-generation Baha'i. His ancestors figure among the first in Neyriz to accept the Babi and later the Baha'i faith. He immigrated to the United States at the young age of 17. And like many immigrants, he sought a better life here in America. And he worked and attended college. He got his doctorate degree in education from the University of Massachusetts. And he's had a distinguished career. He's done work with his education that is very notable, such as founding a school you should look into. Dr. Adiyeh, what is that school called?
Harlem Prep School.
Harlem Preparatory School.
Harlem Preparatory School. You should look into it. They did amazing things. And we've also introed this in other videos. Please watch them. Now, he has written a book called The Foreigner, From an Iranian Village to New York City. And it tells the story of an Iranian immigrant to the United States in a series of moving and humorous episodes set against the backdrop of a changing Iran. The plight of the Baha'is there, the tumult of the 60s and the 70s in the United States. And if you want to find out more, I mentioned the school. It is www.harlemprepschool.com. Or again, he has some other websites. You can see it right now on clearwaterbaha'is.org, www.clearwaterbaha'is.org. You'll find that on our homepage, the websites that he has been not just contributor to, but really instrumental in. So with that being said, Dr. Adiyeh, welcome.
Thank you, John. I really was enjoying listening to you. Not only your introduction to me, but also the way you described the presentation. Where did you get all that information?
Well, we do have this posted on clearwaterbaha'is.org for anyone to take a look at. We usually post them a week prior. And we, again, for next week, we'll have an event. So you can also find for next week's event when we replace it, the items. And Jeremiah, if you could correct me if I'm wrong, I think we keep it on the website. So there's a permalink.
There is, but it's never on the front page. It's after that week for that presenter.
Yeah. So there will be a permalink if you want to share that for your own personal use. Whoever is watching this, we will have that available. But for all intents and purposes, we on the homepage we showcase events, and that's where we got this beautiful introduction.
Thank you. It was quite good. As John mentioned, last week we spent a good deal of time to talk about the life of Tahirih, and I may just briefly go over it, some general points so you know who Tahirih is. But before doing that, I thought I just mentioned, I think John also made a reference to it, that it's amazing that the appearance of Tahirih in Persia at the middle of 1840s was quite an unusual phenomenon. I think Edward Brown, who was quite a famous scholar and Orientalist, mentioned that the appearance of a woman like Tahirih in any country or any religion is an unusual phenomenon, but to her appearance and acceptance of the Bab in Persia, it was a miracle. And it was obvious really, because in that country that the station of women were pretty much the same as, sometimes they refer to them as second-class citizens, but there was no such thing second class. They were really treated as a subhuman in that culture. And so Lord Curzon, who was the Governor General of India, appointed by the Queen Victoria, talked extensively about Tahirih, or Count de Guibnon, the French diplomat, who translated Bab's writing from French to English, including Bab's book Bayan, talks about Tahirih extensively. Who else talk about her? Counselor Nicholas. Nicholas was a great scholar also, who wrote extensively about Babi period and also the contribution of Tahirih. Then another one, I just want to say a few things about some legacy of Tahirih. So you know that we are not talking about just an odd Persian woman, a poet who became Babi and then claimed some fame. There was a very famous Indian poet and by the name Iqbal. And if I'm not mistaken, he even got the Nobel Prize for literature. Iqbal was introduced to Tahirih's poetry by another person, but eventually he met with Martha Root and became more familiar with Tahirih's writing and Babi faith and Baha'i faith. And he wrote extensively about Tahirih. Iqbal is very famous in the Indian and Pakistan culture. He was a Muslim, and he was actually considered a spiritual founder or leader of the state country of Pakistan. You know, Pakistan, I think in late 1940s, and Iqbal is considered really because he believed that the Muslim minority in the large country of India would be subject to harassment and persecution, and he wanted them to have their own country. So he helped the formation of the country called Pakistan. And he was, in his writing, he talks about Tahirih extensively, and Tahirih became so famous because of Iqbal's writing and others that even these days, every year, there is one day celebrated by people of Pakistan. It's called Tahirih's Day, and they all remember her and all that. And then again in the book that I think you made a reference to, is called The Calling, that Hillary and I put together, the last chapter of the book to deal in detail about the legacy of Tahirih and its numerous references to European and American scholars, writers, magazine, newspaper is unbelievable to realize. And I'm sure is a God gift to write so much about the person of her. I think she got as much recognition as Bob, the founder of the Bobby Faith, got in the Western press. Time magazine in America in 1850s wrote about her, or a number of French magazine and newspapers and scholars, Italian, British, and many journalists and Orientalists. So this gives you a picture of who Tahirih's legacy was left, even though in her own country, as John mentioned, at the middle of night, they killed her and they threw her in the well and covered her with the stone and tried to erase her memory, even by her own family. They didn't want to be affiliated with her. But then through her poetry and through the effort of the Baha'is, nowadays Tahirih is considered perhaps the forerunner of the woman liberation in the East and also in the West. There is a great deal of similarity, maybe not as obviously as you can realize, between the station of woman in Persia and the station of woman in America. Even though the woman in America did not suffer the humiliation and all the trouble that the woman of Persia and Islamic world had, but they had their own difficulties and problems. They were not really considered a full citizen, neither in Constitution or later on through different amendments. They got that right until perhaps even 1920, when they got the right to vote. And we were talking about that. Is my wife Tahirih there? Okay, because the reason I'm asking that, because I'll be talking about the Seneca Falls, and she attended the conference herself in Seneca Falls a few years ago. That the team of the conference was Tahirih and a woman by name not Mary Baker, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And then if she's not here, I can talk about that. I thought I could ask her to share some of her points in that occasion. So who was Tahirih? And let me say a few words about her. Tahirih was born in a very prominent and distinguished religious family in the city of Qazvin, which is a town maybe an hour or so drive, 2 hours drive from capital Tehran. Her father and her uncle, and especially her mother, were the most learned scholars in Persia. Her uncle has married the king's sister. The king at the time was Muhammad Shah, so they had the royal connection. And then her mother, on her own right, was a scholar and a teacher. And then from very beginning, she began to study and to read the Quranic by writing, the tradition of Islam, the poetry, and the rest. And her father often would say how much he wished that this girl, Tahirih, was a boy that could easily become a leading mullah of Persia, and how unfortunate it is that she's only a girl. How little this old man knew that this girl or this woman would outshine all the mullahs and ayatollahs of Persia, and forever they would make a reference, they talk about her. So she was named Fatemeh, Salame, Zarrin Taj, and a whole bunch of other wonderful names, but eventually an Qurratul Ain, the solace of the eyes, and I tell you why she was named that way. Eventually, originally by Bob himself, and later on confirmed by Baha'u'llah, she was named Tahirih. Her famous title for a while, and still is, was Qurratul Ain. There was a school of thought developing in Persia at the time called Sheikhi. A man by the name Sheikh Ahmad Ahsa'i has started a new school of thought in that country, which was quite different from the rest of the Muslim community. His ideology and his writing it was more of a showing that lots of stories and lots of writing in Quran and Hadith, they cannot be interpreted physically. The return of Qa'im or return of Jesus is not the physical return. This was really, it was a spiritual springtime or return spiritually, that when we say Qa'im would come back or Jesus would come back. So Tahirih became very involved in this movement, and then eventually she wrote some essays defending that school of thought. And the essays and what she was writing impressed a man by name Sayyid Kazim, who at that time was the leader of this movement, and he referred to her as Qurratul Ain, solace of the eyes. And so she's known since then among the Babis and Baha'is and non-Baha'i community as Qurratul Ain. She married to her simple-minded cousin by the name Muhammad, and they had 3 children, a daughter and 2 sons. And I'm sure she had the miserable life living in a confined marriage of a Persian setup. After she became a Shaykhi or follower of this new school of thought, she decided to go to Karbala, which at that time was the center of learning and center of all the intellectual and the giant of Islamic world, to study further and to meet her master, Sayyid Kazim. When she arrived in Karbala, she discovered the poor old master is dead, Sayyid Kazim. And Sayyid Kazim's wife invited her to their house to continue the lectureship of Sayyid Kazim, and she did that. The last advice of Sayyid Kazim to his student was that upon his death, they should start to search for the Qa'im, and he said his appearance is imminent, and you would find him anywhere. And I think you're all familiar with the story of Mullah Hussein and others who began to travel around, eventually end up in Shiraz, and eventually they became Babi, and the new faith had started. It's interesting that around the same time, or maybe sometime earlier, Tahirih had the dream. She imagined a young, good-looking Sayyid in his mid-20s, way up in the sky, wearing a green turban and a black cloak, was reciting some beautiful lines. She either remembered that or she wrote it down, and she had those with her. And then she knew also, after realizing that the Sayyid Kazim has advised a search for Qa'im, and one of the people who were looking for the promised Qa'im was her brother-in-law. So she told her brother-in-law, I think her sister name was Maryam, and he said, if you ever find the Qa'im or the promised one, please tell him that I want to be also his disciple and his follower. When they discovered Bab in Shiraz, the man gave the message of Tahirih to Bab, and Bab accepted Tahirih as 17 letter of living. And the story of her acceptance and the life is fully detailed in the chapters of Dawnbreaker and God Passes By. Tahirih, after becoming Babi, became an amazing figure in the new movement, became one of the leaders of the movement in Karbala, in Iraq and Iran. And her lectureship and her conducting the lesson, mostly from behind the curtain, is well known. Her poetic ability was surpassed by her actual writing. Not many people realize, and I have read some of her some of her writing. Her writing is much superior to her poetry, but she's known for her poetry, so let it be. And something also has happened that you may come across, those who really go deep in the life of Tahirih, that there are a number of poems which is not really hers, but for many years, Babis and Baha'is claim they are Tahirih's poetry. And the reason was, I discovered, that Tahirih, in the course of her lectures and her talk, she began to recite some poetry, let's say from Joe or Jack, whatever their name was. But then at the same time, because she had this great ability herself, she would add some line of her own to the poetry. So it was a really mixture of somebody else's poem and hers. That's why the confusion started. But thanks God, recently some Baha'i scholars and non-Baha'i scholars, they were able to go through all of those and discover which poem, for example, belonged to somebody else by name Mahallati, or some belonged to this one. So I would say at least 50% of the poetry that historically we thought that belonged to Tahirih, no, for sure, we know is hers. While she was in Karbala, began serious teaching of the Babi faith. She was an unusual figure. The other Babis, and actually in some even occasion, Bab himself, they were looking to see the progress of the new faith gradually. They did not believe in the radical jump and move toward that. But Tahirih was not that type. She wanted to break with the past, and she wanted to say that the new faith has started, and these are our set of our belief. And this actually even upset not only Muslim community, but even some Babis, that they were quite shocked that some of the things she would say or she would do. They were so bad that some of them wrote a letter to Bab and complained about her behavior and her statement. And Bab actually wrote a beautiful statement he issued and wrote back to them. What can I say about the woman who is Tahirih? This is how the name of Tahirih came about. And of course, and a few other things that he mentioned about her. Her activity in Karbala created a great deal of commotion and upheaval. And there was an attack on her house. They arrested one of her companions, another woman, thinking that maybe Tahirih, they were going to kill her. At the last moment, Tahirih intervened and said, no, that's not Tahirih, I'm the Tahirih. So the understanding was they would not harm them if they leave the city. They left Karbala, and a whole bunch of her followers began to travel with her. A new school of thought actually developed. I didn't know that until recently, called Qurratuliyah. Come from Qurratul Ain. These were the people who were really only in name were Babis, but actually they follow Tahirih as a unique, even a prophet. And I tell you why this was happening. At that time, Bab was either in prison or house arrest and was not able to communicate with lots of people. So there were a number of individuals around the country, like Tahirih in Karbala, Wahid in Meriz, Hujjat in Zanjan, Mullah Hussein and Quddus in Mazandaran, Baha'u'llah in Tehran. These were the leading Babis in the country who had some understanding. They had their own interpretation and their own contribution to this new school of thought. So they had their own collection of the followers at the same time. And Tahirih was well known for this. She had hundreds of the followers that would go from place to place with her. So she moved to Baghdad. Why am I getting so involved in Tahirih? I'm so excited about her that I may as well continue. She moved to Baghdad. She was the guest of the Mufti, or the leading judge of the town, stayed there for a few months. And then at this point, her father and her husband, her family especially, insist that she should come back to Qazvin. And her silly husband, Muhammad, wrote a letter to her, and she said, "No problem." We say, my assistant is very interesting, Tatiana. She sits here, and I think from her face, or if she objects sometime when I don't use the proper terminology. So her husband, Muhammad, Mr. Muhammad, he wrote a letter to Tahirih, and he said, Tahirih, if you promise to behave, and if you come back to Qazvin, we can move back to my household and be a good mother to the kids and this and that. So Tahirih answered, and we have her answer actually in one of her writing. And he said, oh dear, actually he was her cousin. He said, dear cousin Muhammad, let me tell you this. If you would have come from very beginning and accompany me from house to house, from town to town, and when I'm riding my horse, you would hold the leash of the horse in front of me and protect me, I may have considered your offer. But I want to let you know that our relation forever in this world and the world to come has ended, and you are not worthy of any attention and return to you. So she continued her traveling. She went to come back to Iran. She went to Kermanshah. She went to Hamadan. She went to a number of Quran. And eventually she ended up in her birthplace, Qazvin. A couple of days after she arrived in Qazvin, there was a family get-together. Her uncle, a fellow named Mullah Taqi, who was a leading mullah of the town and one of the leading mullah of the country, was present in that meeting. And a serious attack on her started. And then at some point, this man got up and came and slapped Tahirih on the face. And then Tahirih turned to her and said, "Uncle, you should not have done this. I see blood in your mouth." It was an innocent comment that a woman would make when she was abused by this crazy old man. The sad thing happened 2 days later when this Mullah Taqi went to mosque to prepare herself for the Friday ceremony. A Babi who was very upset with him because he was attacking so much of Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim and all that, came from behind the pulpit and stick the dagger in his mouth and kill him on a spot. This created such an upheaval in Qazvin because everybody blamed Tahirih for this murder and this killing. She was put under the house arrest. A bunch of poor Babis were put to death. And the news got to Janab Baha. Who is Janab Baha? Janab Baha was a man by the name Mirza Hussain Ali, who later on we know as Baha'u'llah. He was a leading Babi in Tehran. He heard the news that Tahirih has been arrested. He's under house arrest, and a good chance that they would either poison her or they would kill her. So they made some arrangement through a fellow named Farhadi that come to Qazvin, and then at the middle of night, they sent a message to her that they would put a ladder against the second floor when she was in prison to come down from her room and get on the horses and escape from Qazvin. There's few of them. I don't know who else was with her. But anyway, they left Qazvin at the middle of night, and then they traveled all the way to Qazvin, to Tehran, and she became the guest of Janab Baha'u'llah, or Janab Baha, future Baha'u'llah. For the following 2 years, I would say, she was mostly in hiding because she was blamed for the death of her uncle. So she had to hide from authority and from others. Interesting happened after a short time in Tehran. A conference took place in a place called Badasht. And I'm sure you're all familiar with that also, that Baha'u'llah rented 3 gardens, 81 Babis attended that conference. I think the conference lasted 21 days, and the series of gathering was taking place. And it was there that Tahirih removed her piece that was covering her face. And this became a big, big thing in that occasion and throughout the country. And this says, removing this piece from her face, the covering her face, it may not appear to be that significant. But the question of hijab and question of covering the woman's face was a very important issue historically in Islamic literature and Islamic tradition. We don't know how the woman looked like during the time of Prophet Muhammad himself. There are some indication that none of them covered their faces. And it could have been a later addition to this humiliation of the woman and put them down by covering them completely. So Tahirih, by removing the face cover, he wanted to again emphasize the breaking from the past, the establishment of a new faith. That's why this is very important. So I want to emphasize that I don't think just removing her veil was that important, but it's significant is the break with the past. And she did the whole bunch of other things that was signified that. That's why you have this sort of either theatrical planning of a game she and Qudus play in order to bring this point out. And Baha'u'llah was trying to meditate between them and try to reconcile the differences. After the conference, they went their own way. She was so anxious to join the forces of Mullah Hussein and Quddus in Tabarsi and dress as a man and to join the fighters and defender of the fort. But then Baha'u'llah advised her that it's impossible to get through. All the roads are covered and they're protected by this governmental soldier. There's no way she can get there. For the following 2 years, she was wandering all over Mazandaran, from town to town, village to village, and in hiding, and at the same time preaching and teaching and talking and all that. Eventually, she was betrayed, and she is. There was a village in.
Can you please repeat yourself? You said eventually she was betrayed. You cut out.
Yeah, she was betrayed by someone who knew that she was in hiding in a village called Vaz. And then they came and they arrested her and they took her to Tehran. And it was in Tehran, I think, for a period of 2 years, that was under the house arrest in the house of Mahmud Khan, the mayor of town. We have stories that what took place in these 2 years. She was the center of attention. On many occasions, people would come to visit her and enjoy her company. And the famous occasion is they said there was a wedding of mayor's son. And while the wedding was going on, everyone was around Tahirih, listening to her poetry and listening to her lectures. The end of Tahirih came, especially after that awful incident when the 3 crazy Babis, or 3-4 of them, tried to kill the Shah. They failed. They didn't know what they were doing. And then, of course, a massacre of the Babis started. Quite a number of them throughout the country, they were put to death. As you know, Baha'u'llah was thrown in the black pit in the prison and was exiled eventually to Iraq. And Tahirih, at that point, they decided to put her to death. They said during these 2 years, the king of Persia was Nasruddin Shah. You may have seen his picture some places. The pivot of the god on earth. And he offered to marry Tahirih, and he wrote her, proposed her, if you come and become my wife, I would make you the head of my harem, and you'll be my favorite woman, and this, that. And Tahirih wrote a beautiful poetic answer. We are not 100% sure of this interaction between Tahirih and the Shah, but most likely something has happened, because the 2 lines of poetry that said the Takht Taj Sekandari, and he said, you and your kingdom and your throne, let it be and have it. Me and my way, being a wandering dervish, I am happy with the way I am. You be what you are and let me be what I am. This was sort of a kind and nice answer to say no to a proposal. So that was the end of marriage proposal. So on some middle of night, the governmental soldier came. She was preparing herself for a couple of days because she knew the end is at sight. And as very nicely, a man by name Nicholas, who was a famous French scholar and writer, described the whole incident. She was dressing as a bride and she was praying. So the soldier came, the mayor's son accompanied her. They took her to this garden, Il-Khani, which is known as a bank is built on that location. And they strangled her and they threw her body in the well. How little they knew that they thought by killing her, it would be end of her. But they didn't know that a few years later, a woman by the name Martha Root, for example, would travel all the way from America, would go to Qazvin, and would find the house that Tahirih was living. The man who owned that house later on testified. And he said, I walked in that room and I saw this American woman on the floor prostrating and crying and praying. And this has happened all over. And so maybe not actually in her actual room, but actually in her memory. Hundreds and hundreds of people still today, they are mentioning her name. More than 1,000 books and article has been written about this woman. This is significant and this is unusual. Now let's talk about a little bit about the her contemporaries. What I discovered, Hillary Chapman is a good friend of mine that we have written a bunch of books together, and one of them called The Calling. And we discovered that, and we did some study, that at the same time that Tahirih was doing her thing in the East in Persia, there were a group of women in the West, especially in America, who were also awakened today. And they answered a calling, and they realized that the end time is at hand. And I did a little bit of a study about some of them, which I'd like to share with you. But here I have to refer to some of my notes because they get complicated. The one that was significant figure in the first awakening or first great awakening, these are the terminology which is popular among the Protestant religious figure, the first awakening and second awakening. The first awakening took place in 1730 to 1740, mostly took place in the western part of New York. And a woman by name Mother Ann, you see her picture
Can you
later.
repeat her name?
Mother Ann Lee, L-E-E, who lives from 1736 to 1789. She was originally in England, and she was a Methodist. Oh no, I'm sorry, she was a Quaker. And then they had this unusual, and she collected a group of followers, and they had this unusual view of the praying and teaching, what was kind of unorthodox at the time, because what they would do at the time of prayer, they start to go through all kind of body convulsion and shaking, and sometimes they go on the ground and they roll over as they were doing their things. And so this group, they became known as Shakers. And I'm sure you have heard about the Shaker in England and persecuted. So they left England and they came to America, and they mostly resided in the western part of New York. Anne Lee was traveling extensively all over the place, and she collected a whole number of people. But there was something a bit unusual about their work. Besides being a pacifist and looking for racial equality and a whole bunch of other wonderful things, they believe in celibacy and no sex. Can you imagine a life with no sex? And then even among the married people, there should be no sex. And so this unfortunately led to, little by little, the whole movement was come to an end, because no sex, no baby, not much teaching. So that's the end of it. So what we have now actually from those days is this beautiful Shaker's furniture that you may have seen, and it's very expensive. There's quite a talent was going on to create and manufacture this furniture. So with her death, and then the movement began to die out, and that was the end of the Shakers. The other one that I like to talk about, and I have a special place in my heart for this woman, her name was Isabel Baumford, or Baumfree actually, otherwise known as Sojourner Truth. And who was she? She was a slave, born as a slave, that eventually became a great preaching woman. She had out of one couple of, I wouldn't say marriage, whatever they were doing, she had more than 12 children. Some of them died, and some of them were sold to a slavery. She discovered, she went to church for the first time, I think it was in 1826, that she started to go to church and discover Jesus, and she felt Jesus is with her constantly. This was amazing thing, this woman, she felt the presence of the Holy Jesus in her body. And she thought, when I walk, Jesus is walking with me. When I sleep, Jesus is sleeping with me. When I talk, Jesus is talking with me. And he became a great orator. all these places, from a slave with hardly any education, never gone to school. Even when you listen and read some of her writing, you could see that she was not talking what they call it the proper English at the time, but she was a magnetic speaker, and she was doing a great job. And number of occasions, of course, she was attacked by the others, mostly white people. They said in one occasion, as she was talking, the group of young men in the front row start to scream, and they said, "You're not a woman." She look a little bit tough and rough. You will see her picture. And then she started to take her blouse off to show her breast. And she mentioned, "With this breast, I have fed many young boys like you, white boys." And then quickly, a couple of people jump and stop her from taking her blouse off, just to show that how spontaneous and how ready she was. Her talk is famous. I don't remember right now the detail of it, but she basically constantly quote Bible, but she must have a very good memory because she could not read. So she has listened. She talked about Esther in Bible. There's a great deal of stories about her. And they said her work and her encouragement of the Black men to join the Union Army and to fight for civil war was quite significant. The one interesting case was one of her sons, I think her name was Peter, was taken away from her and was sold. She was in New York, and was sold to this guy who was from Alabama. And they were not supposed to do this. And the guy took the son to Alabama. She went to court, actually, and she won her case, and they have to give the Peter back to him. And so this is a significant case when you study the history of abolitionist movement and what they went through throughout histories. One more person that is Tahirih here?
No.
I think she forgot. Another person that I like to say a few words about is Mary Baker Eddy. Most likely you have heard about her. She lived from 1821 to 1910, and she was quite a significant lady also. She was the founder of the Church of Christ Scientists. In 1879, she formed that church. And then you know that there's a newspaper called Christian Science Monitor, which is a great newspaper. And number of magazine is put up by these people. This poor woman, she was very attractive in her young days, and she married well to start with, but then the husband died, and she married one or two times more. But each time there was some more tragedy. One became a playboy and she left him, and the other one was, I don't know, not very dependable. She was also physically often sick, and all this medication and doctors, whatever was available, would not help her. So she developed this school of thought that the mind and the spirit is really control your health. And through that, you can actually heal yourself. And you all know how the Christian Scientists, what they avoid, what they believe, and all that. But she is really a founder of one of the major Christianity churches, which is well known. Also, beside these two women that I'm talking about, make a reference to, the spirit of time was, we concentrate on a woman, but you have to also remember there were people like Joseph Smith or like William Miller, who they very much were into the idea that second coming is at hand, that Joseph Smith, believed that Jesus Christ was living in the old days in America, and she discovered some books that known as the Book of Mormon. Poor guy, because of the controversy that started about his movement himself, was killed in 1844. And you know about William Miller, that he did some calculation studying Bible and came to the definite result that the coming of Christ would happen in March 21st, 1844. There's a little bit of different 21st to May 23rd, when Bob declared himself. Most of these people, unfortunately, they were not aware that the young man by the name of Mullah Hussein has found the second coming. And Bob has made the declaration, and Baha'u'llah complete the whole process. But then Villar was very disappointed. And you know, these people, the founder of the Mormons and the founder of the Adventists, the two of them were all still exist, and they are very popular. Another person that I want to make a reference to, and this is not necessarily, even though they all had some religious connotation in this period, women were not allowed to preach and talk in the church. Like, for example, in Persia, that the talk was very unusual for Tahirih to give lecture and talk in the places. Here, they were not allowed. So sometimes they refer to some of these ladies that I made a reference to as a preaching woman. And then there were some, of course, that even though they were Christian, but they were more trying to bring about some social justice. And the big issue those days was either the giving abolitionist movement and the plight of the Black people and slaves in this country. The other movement was the station of women and giving them the right to vote and the right to have some equal right in terms of divorce, in terms of division of inheritance, in terms of holding political position, in terms of becoming officially a minister in the church. And this was the work of few other women, which are quite historical. One was Elizabeth Cady Stanton, quite a significant lady. The other one was Susan Anthony, that you all know about. The other one was one by the name Mott, M-O-T-T. These were the people who were in the forefront of getting the right for the woman to vote and asking for their equality. And at the same time, of course, they wanted to solve some of the social problems. Alcoholism was a big problem. Prostitution was a problem. Child labor was a problem. And a whole bunch of other issues that only women were concerned at that time and trying to resolve. So they decided to set up a conference, and the conference took place in July 19 and 20, 1948, in a small town called Seneca Falls. And why Seneca Falls? Because this Elizabeth Cady Stanton was living there, of course, and she was a rich woman and a very prominent husband. So they made some request and connection with the Methodist church minister, and they get permission to use the church, and a whole bunch of people attend that conference, including 40 men, which they didn't expect that. It was in this conference that they issued some major and beautiful statement that I beg you to read it, that really was the beginning of asking to give equality and right to the women of America. It took maybe 70 years, 1920s, I think eventually they got the right. And they said in 1920, there was only one of the people who were attending the Seneca Falls was still alive. In 1920, eventually women of America got the right to vote. And you can see in the year 2020, where we're living now, still we are dealing with the problem of gender equality and difficulty we are facing in this country. What has happened in Seneca Falls and that conference, it was so close time-wise to where conference of Badash took place. And it seemed that either some Baha'is or non-Baha'is, they recognized the significance of Tahirih's attending the Badash conference and Elizabeth Cady Stanton attending Seneca Falls, that they have created this beautiful, what they call it? Mural. And it's hung on I was in that place. You should go and visit. It's a national place now to visit. They have that in one picture. It shows Tahirih in the Persian outfit. In the other side, it shows Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And there has been a number of conferences taking place in that location dealing with these two women. That's why I was hoping that my wife Tahirih being in the audience, I think she went to sleep. And she forgot. So we are getting old. And then because she was attending that conference, she could talk more about that and on the subject. What else I can tell you? Oh, there is so much thing to say.
We have the pictures to show.
So we're going to, if you don't mind, Jeremiah and John, I take a break and you start to show the picture. And I say a few words as we go along. Then we can answer some question if there is any question.
Sounds great.
This is a drawing. There is no picture. There's no drawing of Tahirih. So whatever you see anywhere is all imagination of the artist. So this is one presentation of somebody who did a good job and did painting of her face. I have a good friend in Romania, and for one of the book I wrote for the junior youth called, what's it called? Path to God? Search for God?
For Search for God.
In Search for God is Tahirih is a story for the young and junior youth. And she did some drawing. This is Tahirih with the, what is it under it? I cannot read.
Studying with her mother and sister.
This is her mother and sister, and I probably the guy in the back probably is her father. This is her drawing. She's a wonderful artist and painter. This is the one thing she was lucky. I guess this goes with the territory. She was born in a very learned family. And you can see from this picture that not many Persian houses had their own library. And so this was quite significant that probably in this library, there were hundreds or thousands of books that she had access to. And from early childhood, she could go and research. And it was, I think, in this library that the historian believed that she discovered some of the Sheikh's book, Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim, and became familiar with their writing and eventually accepted their school of thought. This is again an artist's rendition that Tahirih is talking to the other ladies and try to, this probably was in Karbala or someplace. This is a wonderful place. This is a church in Seneca Falls. It's so beautiful, actually. When you go there, right next to this church is a sort of a museum that they have a statue, they have writing, they have pictures. It's a delightful place to visit. If you are traveling at all in north part of the United States or part of Canada, definitely you should include visiting Seneca Falls in your trip. Oh, this is the mural I was talking about. Tahirih, I think, is on the right, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton is on the left, is hanged in that museum. These are the two wonderful ladies. This is Susan Anthony. I wish I knew more about her, but she must have been quite a significant figure, because if you know that her picture is on that gold coin that was issued by United States government, dollar coin, not gold, dollar coin. That's Susan Anthony. Oh, that's my favorite. That's the Sojourner Truth. And the reason I got this name, I don't know if I mentioned or not, in one of her talks, she said, I'm not anymore Isabella Bamfrey, I am Sojourner, because she liked to travel constantly and preach and talk about Jesus. And then they said, what is the truth? She said, because when I travel and when I preach, I only tell the truth. So of course she became known, and that's the cute way actually, you have a name. What's your name? Sojourner Truth. Why? Because I travel and I tell the truth. So that's what my name is. So this is I forgot to mention one more ladies. I wonder if you have a picture. Do we have a picture of Harriet Beecher?
Maybe. Let's go with,
okay.
There you go.
Oh, Harriet Beecher. This woman is quite interesting. She is the author of Uncle Tom Cabin. And I think probably most of you either have read the book and know the book about the book. Is really the first book that described the plight and the difficulties and harassment of the slaves in this country. It was really an awakening book and it said some actually believe that it led some people toward the civil war in this country. She was a quite unusual woman. No, what I found out later, that she is related, I think great-great-grandmother of a Baha'i woman by the name Dorothy Baker. How many of you know about Dorothy Baker? You cannot answer me. Dorothy Baker was a wonderful Baha'i teacher who eventually was named by Shoghi Effendi as Hand of a Cause. She was an American, and she traveled extensively for the faith. For a whole bunch of years, she was a chairman and a member of National Spiritual Assemblies. And eventually, in one of her trips, I think over Mediterranean, her plane went down and she died, and in that plane crash. And she was 13 years old when she and her grandmother, a woman by the name Mother Beecher, was met Abdul Baha, and she remembered that occasion. And from that time, she was on fire, and she really became one of the greatest Baha'i teachers that America has seen. And it's so funny, this woman, on some occasion, met Sojourner Truth. And there is a discussion, somewhere she wrote that how impressed she was with Sojourner Truth, that this was an unusual woman. And because Harriet was so much in this black and white crisis, and she talks also about the Sojourner Truth. Now we can go back to see other pictures. Oh, this is Anne Lee, the Shaker woman who came from England, and she was quite a dynamic figure. Was a little bit tough and rough and scary type. She scared the hell out of you. Her God was a God of Moses. If you don't behave, well, forget it, cut his head. So this was her approach, and movement unfortunately died out after her, and after the rest of them died. Next. This is the founder of the Christian Science Church, and she was quite pretty in her younger days, and she still looked very charming. And I think she's probably the most significant figure among all of them, because the church that she established has millions and millions of members, and she's considered one of the 100% in America or in the world maybe that has influenced. Next, do we have any more?
You cut out when you were saying influence.
Yeah. So this is the book this humble servant has written. And
no, I'm saying that you cut out your sound. Cut out. Can you repeat what you were saying?
I said that she was good looking.
No, the end was that her influence.
Oh, her
the
influence.
church
Yeah, she was. I said she was the most influential church leader, and the church that she established, she probably is one of the major movement in Christianity, and she has the million and million. Actually, I come across few of member of her church. There was I was involved in a school called Harlem Prep, and one of our teachers was a member of her church, and she had a serious car accident, I remember, and she thought she tried to heal herself by praying and by meditating and all that, and she was all right after a while. So,
but most of her life, actually, she was very sick. That's how she decided to start searching for ways to heal herself.
Exactly. It was trying to cure herself from her illnesses that she had, and then next to know, she started to write, and her writing, her book. I think she wrote a book. Let me see if I have the name of her book. Oh, she wrote a book called Science of Health. Something. Oh, Science and Health. Secret of the Secret of Science and Health. Something like this. This was her famous book that she wrote. Okay, I'm ready to answer some questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, John.
Sure thing. So here is a question. We have from Norbert Dubois 2 questions. He says, Salam Hale Chotori Hussein, your old New York City friend Norbert Dubois. Number 1, do we know anything about Tahirih's daughter or her sons?
About who? I'm sorry.
Daughters and sons of Tahirih. Do we know?
Oh, yeah. She had, as I said, she had 2 sons and a daughter. The daughter died shortly after her mother was killed, most likely out of depression and sadness. But the 2 sons grow up to be some of the leading mullahs of Qazvin and Iran. Her family altogether tried to avoid identify themselves with her as much as they could, because they knew that she was sort of untouchable, and you don't want to be identified with her. So they avoid even, they changed their last name. No, originally their last name is Baraghani. They changed their last name, they called themselves something else, and they deny any relation. But I noticed lately, I saw a couple of indication on the internet that some of her descendants began to regret what they have done. And they said, while the world is recognizing the station of their ancestor Tahirih, her own family ignored her, didn't do much. So that's all we know about the 2 sons and the daughter of hers. What's the next question?
So the next question is, also, not only did Europeans write about Tahirih, but the famous French actress Sarah Bernhardt wanted to do a stage drama about the Persian Bobby martyr.
They did actually, I can think of, if I'm not mistaken, there was a famous play was written by a Russian playwright that was put on a stage on St. Petersburg. And then I think was repeated later on somewhere in Paris. And then I think there's another play was written, I don't know if they put on the stage, called God's Heroes. And that's really a story of her and Bob and all that. So there has been some, I don't know particularly about this one that you're referring to, but most likely there was such a thing, yes.
Yeah, Norbert, if you want to unmute yourself and explain, maybe it might help.
Yeah. I think she went back to sleep.
Hello, can you hear me? Oops.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Ah, nice to see you, Hussein.
Oh, hi, nice to see you too.
Where is your lovely Tahirih?
You bring lots of good memory from my younger days.
You don't look much different from 1975.
It's very nice of you to say that. I wish something like that.
No, I told some of my friends to please watch this presentation of Tahirih. This is very remarkable. The last time I saw you was at ABS conference in 2013. How are Linda and Bobby?
Oh, Linda and Bobby, they have grown up. Bobby is a big shot now. Bobby has moved to Texas. He's a dean of major law school. And Linda is becoming, just like her mother, fully committed to the faith and serving the faith. And she has 2 children, and she's a busy. She used to call me every day, but no, I'm lucky if I get a call from her once a week. I guess because she's serving God instead of contacting her father.
Anyway, I'm
Wonderful.
merci.
Of course, I remember you from days that you were in Washington, D.C., my friend.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, next question.
Yes. So we are looking through the list, and at the moment, if you've left a question on Facebook, we're looking for that. I think that you didn't, with all the beautiful speech you made, like last time, as people gave their the thanks, they also are speechless and absorbing in all your amazing points. Now, the Church of Christian Science, there's a question on this. Church of Christian Science, they're still around, right?
Yes, they're actually they're newspapers, and not far. I live in downtown Manhattan, and only 2 blocks from me, they have this very popular places called Reading Room. I don't know if you have seen it. At the Christian Science, they have a library, they have books. You can go sit down and read. They're all over the country. They have set up this sort of Barnes and Noble type place, but a smaller, mostly religious book. So the newspaper is very popular. Christian Science Monitor is a secular, very independent. And then the movement is active. There has been some legal cases, as you know, that especially about blood transfusion for children and all that, is legal cases that the parents do not have a right to prevent the doctor if the children need the blood transfusion, because of course, they believe that you can pray and the kid will be all right. This is the trouble we also have with this corona business. I think that some folks are not taking this thing that seriously. And then the vaccine may not be as popular among some of this religious group who thought that God would come and give them an injection and they will not die. But by the time they find out, it's too late. So there's a limit that we can go. There must be a moderation, and in terms of religious and science. This is one of the basic principles of the faith, that unless religious ideology is coordinated and in the right relation with the science, it's superstitious. This is our belief. And so I don't want to talk about this that much, but that's how I believe that they are wonderful people, but I think they're a little bit extreme when it comes to the health issue. In the right relation with the science, it's superstitious. This is our belief. And so I don't want to talk about this that much. But go ahead, talk if you want. Okay.
That was you.
Well, we appreciate the response in the matter, and again, thank you for explaining a little bit about it for those of us who haven't been exposed to it. So there's another question that was made about the conference in Seneca Falls. So in Badasht, the conference occurred before or after Seneca Falls?
It's around the same time.
I think it was pretty close to each other. I don't remember the exact date of the Badasht conference, but I know that they I think was within a few weeks of each other that the two took place. And that's why they made such a, the whole, it's so interesting that when you think of William Miller closing shops and advising all the Adventists and others to ready for the coming of Jesus and this and that. And it's at the same time, a man by name Mullah Hussein and his companion, they were searching for the promised one. And then they were lucky, at least in the East, they found the promised one. But the poor fellow like William Miller could not realize that, or even the German Templar who they took off and they went to Haifa and to Israel waiting for the promised one. All these people were not aware of the coming of Bab and Baha'u'llah, and some of them still are in the cloud and they refuse to accept the fact. We are lucky really that at least by chance or maybe by some good of our ancestors, we found out that what took place actually in 1844.
Yeah, for sure. It's an interesting phenomenon indeed, where you have a lot of
William Miller was so disappointed. You know, there's a famous expression, the great disappointment is all referred to this incident that he was heartbroken, and he was a good man. He meant well, and he did his work, but somehow he missed the show.
They didn't have internet.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. They didn't have internet back then. Sending mail across the Atlantic Ocean probably took, I don't know, months, maybe.
Actually, speaking of internet, my daughter married this wonderful young man, and her father-in-law was telling me that when he was in Hong Kong, he saw a T-shirt, and the back of the T-shirt said, "Everything is wonderful, but everyone is complaining." It was interesting that so he Googled the statement, found out there was a comedian who have made this statement, and so he went and listened to what this comedian has said in one of their late TV shows. He said, in the old days, when you want to travel from New York to California, you would get on the car or get on horses, would take days and sometimes months to get there. No, you go on the airport, you get on the plane, there is half an hour delay in departure, and everybody complain, "My God, how long it takes to get to California, what's happening?" Everybody's so uptight, and instead of 6 hours, it took them 7 hours. Yeah, there was a long flight, this and that. Or when you were writing a letter even, it would take months and months for the person to get the letter. Internet doesn't come right away on, and you begin to hit the board and you said, "Oh, the computer is so slow today, I cannot get the," and you said, you just send the email, within a second somebody in Australia get your message and you're complaining. So it was a whole series of this wonderful statement that everything is so wonderful, but at the same time, everyone is complaining. This is good for you and Jeremiah, who are in business of internet and computer, to not to complain when your system is too slow.
Yes, we only complain when we ourselves don't do what we're supposed to do. Then,
Right.
but yes, that's a very fair point. We are living in a time where we have a lot of things taken for granted, so much that the people before, like Tahirih and these very strong women that you had mentioned, these brave women, they had done in the face of a climate that didn't view them as full human beings. And it's amazing because you mentioned, for example, you mentioned how the circumstances in Iran, they weren't viewed as equals to men. We understand that, but in a lot of senses, women were viewed as property, and that's not something that we would like to practice today. We don't want to practice that today. We understand how barbaric it is. The fact is, this is exactly what these women faced.
Yeah.
And somehow they managed to break through those barriers, such thick barriers. And it's one thing to be thankful for, that in this age, we have the technology we have. Right now, we're communicating. Who knows who's watching this from where? I mean, all of this is a phenomenon of today, and it is one of the blessings we have because of these people who they sacrificed their lives.
It's a friend of mine who's a bit going too far in his belief. When Bob left with Qudus going for his pilgrim to Mecca, they were sailing on the boat, and the sea was rough and the trip was quite difficult and everyone was sick and all that. And they said Bob often pray that in future there will be better means of traveling and better means of communication. And this fellow Baha'i that I was talking to, he really believed that the invention of the plane, cars, internet is all because of those prayers of the Bab, which, well, we could say yes or no, but this is really the changes that they are actually, if you look at what we have now. Last night I was watching TV, and CNN had the report about 1918 influenza in this country, and how many people died, and how hundreds of thousands of people died simply because they didn't have any antibiotic, because antibiotics was discovered 10, 15 years later. Just simple idea of having antibiotic. You see what it has done, what a miracle we have, or even with this COVID business, that within the 6-7 months, they are able to find a vaccine that prevents you from catching this disease. These are all miracles. You know, we don't appreciate the progress that humanity, sometimes we keep saying, oh, things are so bad, the air is polluted, the rivers are dirty. Of course, there's the degree, but we got to sometimes emphasize all the wonderful thing that has happened for humanity. Almost 78 years ago, we got involved in a major international war that millions of people lost their life in the Second World War. Now, for the last 60, 70 years, we had just some minor conflict here and there. Of course, life is important. Vietnam, Korea, or Persian Gulf and things like this. So we are making progress, and we should be hopeful that better things are coming.
Yes, yes. There's something interesting, though, since you mentioned the Bab in his prayer about sea travel. Baha'u'llah promises us that the means for the unification of humanity will be provided to us. For the promulgation of the message of Baha'u'llah will be provided to us. And that's not it's not something to surmise over analysis and say, well, this may mean that. Baha'u'llah expressly promises us the confirmations that the means will be provided to promulgate his message. So irrespective of those who want to contend whether or not it has a direct effect, Bab's prayers, which I believe it does, it's very clear the prophecy Baha'u'llah has given for the means to be made available to us. And the fact that, again, we're here today, it's a testament to that. So
how about we do this next week? I would introduce you and you give a talk. You sound better than me. I think that's what we should do.
No, thank you. No, I like dialogue, as they call it.
That's wonderful, John. That was a good statement.
But thank you so much for joining us today. Really, thank you so much. It is around that time for us to actually leave and say goodbye. But we do want to ask, if you could, how can people find more information about this? Could you please share links or where someone can search now after having watched this video?
There is a website called tahirihthepureone.com,
okay,
which contain a lot of information. And of course, Amazon and Baha'i Bookstore are carrying the book, The Calling, as well as the book for junior youth.
Okay, cool. So what is this book for the junior youth?
Let me show.
She's right there. Diana is getting the copy. You know what happened is that the emphasis that the House of Justice has put on the junior youth these days, Hillary and I decided to write some books that deal with the, how do I show this, Tatiana?
Just show it in front of you.
Yeah, just bring it a little closer, if you don't mind, to the camera, the one in front of you.
It says the chosen.
Well, you cut out. So
Oh.
Okay, I see the book now.
The
All
book
right.
is The Chosen Path, Tahirih of Persia and Her Search for God, and is a specifically created version of the life of Tahirih to appeal to junior youth age.
Beautiful.
Is description of her life. And it's very easy to read, and also is not expensive at all. If anyone wants any copy, please probably just text us through our Facebook page, and we can send you a PDF file.
And that Facebook page is the name of this book?
No, the Facebook page is Tahirih the Pure One is also Facebook page as well as website.
Okay.
So you can find us on Facebook by Tahirih the Pure One, and you can leave us a message there. We will respond right.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Again, Dr. Adia and everyone, Tatiana, thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate it. From the Baha'is of Clearwater, Florida, we send you our love and our thanks. And I see we have Ferdanis Celebi. Is that her name? She says, thank you very much from Toronto.
Sure.
And Mary Minier says, thank you. as well.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, guys. You have been wonderful.
All right. Bye, everyone.
God bless you, John.
Thank you. Bye-bye.